You want to have great heart health, and you heard that salt is bad for the heart, so you've been working hard at minimizing it. But how much does sodium restriction really have on your health? That's exactly what we're going to cover in this video. So it's true that sodium restriction or salt restriction does improve blood pressure in people who have high blood pressure to begin with. For instance, in one meta-analysis, when people with high blood pressure reduced their sodium intake, their blood pressure decreased about 5.8 over 2.5 millimeters of mercury, which is quite impressive. In another systematic review, sodium restriction reduced blood pressure by about 7.1 over 3.9 millimeters of mercury. Again, this is in people with high blood pressure to begin with. Now, blood pressure is just a marker for cardiovascular health. But what about when we look not at the impact of salt or sodium on high blood pressure, but specifically on cardiovascular health? That's what we're going to look at right now. In one study, sodium restriction reduced heart disease risk by about 25% in hypertensive individuals. Though here's the problem with most research. It gives relative risk and not absolute risk. The absolute risk is, let's say one person in 100 has a heart attack, that the absolute risk is 1%. If two people have a heart attack out of 100, that the absolute risk is 2%. However, the number 2 is literally 100% greater than the number 1. So when you see a reduction of 25%, that's a relative risk. It's not an absolute risk. If it reduced from 40 to 30 heart attacks out of 100 people, that's impressive. If it went from 4 to 3, that's not very impressive. So hence the need to understand absolute risk, and often research does not talk about absolute, they talk about relative risk. And the reason for that is the difference in priority between researchers and doctors. Researchers are basically science geeks, and all they want to do is they want to marvel at numbers. Like, oh, that's a big number, that's a little number. They just want to see the relationships between numbers. They don't care about health. That's not their priority. They are far removed from the patient. Doctors want two things. They have the same priority as researchers. They want to know the truth, but they also want to know, how does the truth impact health? Maybe it's true that sodium reduction reduces the risk of heart disease by 25%. But if it reduces it from 4 people to 3 people out of 100, statistically that's significant, but clinically that's not significant. So bear that in mind. So we know that salt or sodium restriction really works well in people with high blood pressure. But how does it work for people who have normal high blood pressure? In one meta-analysis, researchers analyzed how long sodium restriction takes to lower blood pressure. And the answer is simple, it's just 1 week. In 1 week, going from high sodium to low sodium, basically it's going to drop blood pressure as much as it's ever going to drop. So there's no difference between 1 week and 8 weeks or beyond. So the current public health recommendations for sodium are 2,300 milligrams per day for people with normal blood pressure. However, in people with existing hypertension, the recommendation is 1,500 milligrams per day. But where do these public health guidelines really come from? Because research shows that there is almost no difference whatsoever between normotensive or people with normal blood pressure who consume as much as 5,700 milligrams per day and the recommended amount of 2,300 milligrams per day. So the blood pressure reduction effects of sodium restriction are minimal in people with normal blood pressure. However, are there nonetheless improvements in heart health as a result of sodium restriction? Well, the answer is actually yes. In another meta-analysis, the researchers found that people who eat more than 2 grams of sodium per day have a 24% higher risk of having a stroke and a 63% higher risk of dying from that stroke, even though it doesn't raise blood pressure in people with existing normal high blood pressure. However, when it comes to all-cause mortality, which is your risk of dying for any reason, one meta-analysis found that the level of sodium intake was the lowest between 2,645 and 4,945 milligrams per day. And again, this is in people with existing normal high blood pressure. This is different in people with hypertension or high blood pressure. In people with high blood pressure, by contrast, their lowest risk of all-cause mortality happens at a level of between 2,300 and 3,600 milligrams per day. So if you just isolate it to just heart disease, lower is better. However, you don't want to not die from heart disease only to die of cancer. You want to not die, basically. And so it seems like the best level for people with hypertension is 2,300 to 3,600 milligrams per day. For people without hypertension, it's higher. So why does sodium restriction have such a favorable effect on heart health, even if it doesn't reduce blood pressure in people with normal blood pressure? There are a few different reasons. One possible reason is something called arterial stiffness. When you eat a lot of sodium, and again, in people with normal blood pressure, that's over about 5,000 milligrams per day. So in these people, it stiffens their arteries. Now, arteries should not be stiff. They should be more like spaghetti and less like a garden hose. But when they're a garden hose, that's not good because that predisposes you to heart disease. That's one reason. Another reason why sodium restriction is very helpful towards heart health, not just blood pressure, is how it interacts with other minerals. Sodium is antagonistic to potassium. When sodium is high, potassium is low, and that's bad for your heart. It also affects blood clotting. You want your blood to not clot too quickly or too slowly. If it clots too quickly, well, then blood can't get through. If it clots too slowly, you can bleed out every time you shave. So you don't want too slow or too fast, you want just the right amount. What sodium does is it speeds up blood clotting, so you clot too quickly. If that clot floats around in the bloodstream and ends up in a vein or an artery, it's like a dam in a river. It just blocks the flow of blood. And a fourth mechanism is that excessive sodium decreases brain circulation, so blood flow within the brain, not just below the neck. So then, why does the American Heart Association set their recommendations at 1,500 milligrams per day for people with high blood pressure? Because they're the American Heart Association, not the American All-Cause Mortality Association. They are focused strictly on the heart, not cancer, not other things, not dementia. They are looking at what has the lowest risk of cardiovascular mortality, not all-cause mortality. And that's where the level of 1,500 to 2,300 milligrams per day is best. But again, our priority as people, we're not just focused on the heart, is all-cause mortality. So let's set the limit a little bit higher. Now, some people should absolutely reduce their sodium levels to the right amount, but sodium is not an evil mineral. It exists. After all, the guidelines of the American Heart Association is not 0 milligrams of sodium, it's 1,500 milligrams of sodium for hypertensive individuals. But which kind of people should not reduce their sodium intake? There are a few of them. For example, people who exercise a lot and sweat profusely, with low sodium levels, they can actually get cramps and other electrolyte imbalances, possibly resulting in fainting and other consequences. Some people, when they sweat, their sweat is extremely salty. They lose more sodium in their blood, in their sweat. So as a result, they need a higher sodium intake. Also, some people have low blood pressure to begin with. These people should definitely not restrict sodium because that's going to lower their blood pressure even more. And also, people on certain medications should not be lowering their sodium intakes, especially if people are on diuretics. Although, of course, talk to your pharmacist first. What diuretics do is they make you pee more. In your urine, out comes sodium as well. But again, we don't want a 0 level of sodium, we want some sodium. And so these categories of people should not be lowering their sodium intake. So how much sodium should you be having? We know the upper limit, which is probably about 5,000 milligrams per day for people without high blood pressure, and maybe 3,600 milligrams per day for people with high blood pressure. But what's the lowest amount? Well, one study found that lowering sodium levels excessively, that is below 1,500 milligrams per day, actually can lead to a paradoxical rise in blood pressure. So you're trying to restrict sodium to lower your blood pressure, and yet below those levels, blood pressure rises. There are 3 possible ways we can help you. One way is you can purchase my book on Amazon by searching for High Blood Pressure Reversal Secrets or clicking the link in the description below. Method number 2, how we can help you, is by signing up for our free exercise and nutrition newsletter, which again is also in the description below. And method number 3, with which we can help you, is the greatest possible level, which is one-on-one personal training, which also includes guidance on nutrition. If you want that level of assistance, feel free to click on the link in the description below, which will take you to our homepage where you can apply for a free, complimentary 10 to 15 minute Zoom chat. There is no pressure, no sales pitch, no obligation. It's just a call for us to see, can we work together and can we help you? Thank you and goodbye.